Godzilla once again faces off against his arch-nemesis, King Ghidorah, in a rebooted battle against the famous three-headed dragon. UFOs, mutants, androids, time travel. It's all here on the Atomic Lizards podcast as we look at the Heisei era's version of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
And welcome to Atomic Lizards. We're a trio of friends podcasting about the Godzilla franchise and other films we love. I'm Miranda, the film fanatic.
I'm Udi, the de facto film expert.
And I'm Dan, the Kaiju extraordinaire.
On today's episode of Kaiju Korner, we are covering Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991.
The Futurians, time travelers from the 23rd century, arrive in Japan in the year 1992 to warn the Japanese government of the nation's destruction under Godzilla. They offer to help erase Godzilla from history by preventing his creation. With Godzilla seemingly gone, a new monster emerges as the Futurians' true intentions are revealed.
Just a quick little aside, I want to say I didn't know that the time travelers actually had a name that they went by, the Futurians. That's interesting. I never knew that, so it's kind of cool. Anyway, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991 was written and directed by Kazuki Omari and produced by Shogo Tomiyama. It is the 18th film in the Godzilla franchise and is the third film in the Heisei era. The film stars Kosuke Toyohara, Anna Nakagawa, Megumi Odaka, Katsuhiko Sasaki, Akiji Kobayashi, Yoshiro Tsuchiya, and Robert Scott Field.
This episode will have spoilers, so go watch it if you haven't yet. Now let's get started. What are your initial thoughts on Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991?
Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. I definitely feel a lot different about this movie than I have for the previous two. The previous two movies definitely took themselves a little bit more seriously, and while Godzilla vs. Biollante was more out there in terms of its story and whatnot, I felt that it was able to keep things in a slightly more grounded manner. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah decides to completely do out with all that nonsense and immediately jump the shark. Not that that's a bad thing, but for me personally, it was slightly jarring for me to go from Return of Godzilla to Godzilla vs. Biollante to this movie. Now, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is the most Showa-era feeling film out of all the Heisei movies, at least in my opinion. It has some of the most radical ideas in the Heisei era, what with time travel, people visiting from hundreds of years in the future. It's definitely not as serious as the previous two movies, but like I said, that's not a bad thing. I enjoyed some of the campiness, especially with the android character M19. The time travel scenes to World War II were really fun, even though, once again, the American actors they got for those scenes were absolutely terrible. But I always get a kick out of the Steven Spielberg joke because it's just so implausible. And one interesting idea that this movie does have is the Godzillasaurus, because it's very similar to how Mr. Takashi Yamazaki told his Godzilla origin story in Godzilla -1, except the Godzillasaurus wasn't nearly as aggressive as the -1 version. Well, maybe he was to the Americans, but to be fair, they did attack him with their guns. I wonder if there was any influence there. But all in all, I can't say that I liked this movie better than Return or Biollante, but I still enjoy watching it because of how silly it can be, and I do like some of the ideas that the film introduces. But I will admit some of the sillier moments do get a little too silly for me, and it does serve as a bit of a detriment to the movie, but not so much of a detriment that I don't enjoy watching it. In fact, like one of my favorite scenes in the film is the car chase with M19. It's so freaking bad, but that's why I enjoy it so much. There's enjoyment to be had in this movie, both in terms of straight up cheese and some legitimately cool scenes, especially near the end of the movie. So I did like it, I did enjoy it, but it's definitely not as good as the previous two Heisei era films.
I wasn't quite sure what to expect with this one because Dan had previously told us that this was quite different from the previous two. And, we just watched the whole era of Godzilla movies that started in one way and ended in a very different way. And so in just in general, like this whole franchise goes on like kind of a bit of a tonal roller coaster. It's always interesting to see where the movie will go in terms of tone and things like that. So these first two Heisei era movies have been more, I guess, grounded, more serious, but not overly so. Just more so than especially the Showa era. And so I was kind of curious to see how this one would be. And it's definitely more Showa-y for sure, but just very much like 90s weirdness, I guess, is like the best way to describe it. It's not super, super, super weird, but it definitely feels very, very 90s in a lot of ways. And just ultimately, like, it was cool to see a new iteration of King Ghidorah. I love King Ghidorah, so it's just cool to see a new version of King Ghidorah. But yeah, it's kind of curious to see how they evolve the franchise time and time again, and like how it's slowly evolved from the original 54 movie to now, where it's just very 90s and a lot of funny and silly elements have been added, and like some direct inspirations from other movies, which we can talk about later. But yeah, what about you, Miranda? What did you think of this movie?
Yeah, so this movie is very all over the place. I absolutely love the fact that time travel is in this movie. I was disappointed that they weren't aliens and they were just people from the future, because they were like, here's a UFO. And I was like, yay, aliens. But no, it's just time travel, which is totally fine because I am a sucker for time travel. I love a good time travel. Don't think about the logic in this movie because then you will be frustrated. Just sit back, enjoy it, let it just wash over you. It has a lot of influences from popular movies like Back to the Future and Terminator. They're definitely in there, and they're like, hey, let's try this out, which we have seen before with like the inclusion of like the ape aliens and the popularity of Planet of the Apes and other sci-fi movies of the time back in the 60s and 70s, or the James Bond influences too. Like, it's not a new thing for these movies to be influenced by popular media, which, like, hey, they want to ride the trend, right? So it makes total sense. I don't think it takes away from this movie at all, but like I said, just sit back, relax, don't think about it too much because it's not necessarily good. And then one thing I did notice while watching, and I don't know if this is because I'm not familiar with other Japanese movies, but this movie felt very B movie coded, especially when the Americans or like English is being used throughout the movie. And I don't know if this is because they just found English speakers in Japan and was like, hey, we'll pay you like $5, come to our movie set. So then that means that they're not necessarily actors and they don't really know how to deliver lines or whatever. I'm not really sure. But they definitely felt more B movie. And I don't know if rest of the movie in Japanese also feels B movie. Maybe to an American audience, but I don't know how it would feel to like a Japanese audience or outside of a Hollywood realm. So I don't know. I have to do more research on that on my own time, but that's just something I noticed while watching this movie. So Godzilla, obviously back because it's a Godzilla movie. Kind of have an origin story for King Ghidorah, and we have Mecha King Ghidorah, which is really cool. So let's dive into it a bit. I want to kind of talk about the plot first because it is kind of confusing with the time travel. So obviously everyone's listening to this has watched the movie, but let's say you didn't watch the movie. I'm just going to run down the timeline of this just a little bit. So basically the movie takes place in 1992. And then the future they're not aliens, sorry. The future humans or future beings from the 23rd century come back to 1992. And then the future beings and the people from 1992 go to 1944, and then they go from 1944 back to 1992. It's not that confusing, but they do some time travel jumps in this, and it does kind of mess up the timeline a bit. This movie opens present time of 1992. 2. Actually, I think it might open with a flashback. But either way, the present time of this film is 1992. And then from there, the future beings come from the 23rd century. So the year like 2204 or something of that time. Definitely 2200. So they come into the past into 1992. And then the 1992 people and the future people go to 1944. And then from 1994, they go back to 1992. It's not the most confusing time travel timeline, but I think it is kind of important to break out those key years just so when we talk about things, it might be a little easier for us to understand and the listener. Although, if you've watched this movie, you would know, but if you haven't, now you know. So basically, we have time travel. Now, I don't think time travel has shown up in Godzilla beforehand. I feel like I would have remembered that. Definitely aliens, but I don't know about time travel. And time travel, interestingly enough, is brought into this franchise because the previous movie was a box office disappointment, at least according to Wikipedia, and there was a lack of child viewership. So they were like, what can we do? They're like, let's use the Back to the Future franchise. You know, we like that. People like that. Let's use time travel and bring that into this movie. And then they created it, and then they tried to add more of those, like, fantastical elements into this movie. So it's a little different than most of the other Godzilla movies, although it still ends with Godzilla and King Ghidorah. It still ends with Godzilla and King Ghidorah fighting in the middle of a city, which is very classic Godzilla. And we definitely have a movie that is set in stone, like the beats of a Godzilla movie. They have it down to a T, and it's predictable, but this movie was unpredictable because of that time travel element. Like, that is not a bad thing for this movie or for Godzilla movies in general. I think having a key, like, method to their madness is a very good thing for them to have, and that's probably why they've made so many and why they take that central idea and then they add to it, add time travel, add aliens, take away that, make a more serious thing. So I really enjoyed the time travel. And this movie also has influences from other famous movies, like I said, Back to the Future, Terminator's in there. So we're getting like influences of those classic 80s, 90s movies in this movie as well, just like we saw in the previous one. So, with all that being said, what did you guys think of the plot of this movie? Like, did you enjoy the time travel? Was it too weird? Do you think they could have done it in a different way? Like, what's the vibe? How are you feeling?
So earlier, Miranda, you said try not to think about the story too much or else you're going to get frustrated. And yeah, that's a good point because I used to think, well, I still kind of do think this is one of the weakest plots in the Godzilla franchise because the story it really just doesn't make sense to me. Like, when I watched this movie, I remember thinking one of the biggest issues I had with the story is, so you got these 3 people that come, well, I guess technically 4 people that one of them's an android, but you got these like 4 people that come from the future to warn Japan about Godzilla. And you have someone in there that's Japanese, and she explains later on in the movie that Japan eventually becomes like a superpower, and they start like literally buying up other countries, or at least absorbing other countries, buying territories in other countries. And one of the reasons why these people come back in time is so they can stop Japan from becoming a superpower, because their whole goal was to stop Godzilla from ever being created and thus make King Ghidorah so he can destroy Japan and keep them from becoming a superpower. But like, I always thought that just never made sense to me, because first of all, how did the one Japanese lady not know that that's what they were going to do? because at first I was thinking, like, what was she expecting them to do? Like, they come back in time to warn Japan about Godzilla. I guess Godzilla comes back like 200 years later in the future, and that's what she thinks they're warning Japan about. Because at first I didn't realize that. So I was always really confused on how she wasn't in on their plan. But I guess it's because she was under the impression that they were going to warn Japan about Godzilla's resurgence in 200 years. But I mean, that's 200 years from now. Like, is the current Japanese government really going to be that worried about Godzilla attacking 200 years from now, especially if they become a superpower country and like absorb other countries? So I just never understood that part of the story, why this Japanese woman wasn't in on that. And like, why did they even bring her along to begin with? Like, their whole idea, their whole plot was to destroy Japan of the past. Why would you bring along a Japanese woman? That would be like if like it would be like if you went back to the American Revolution and you bought an American with you. Like, that part, that just doesn't make sense to me. So like, I just never understood that. And there's even a point where she releases the Dorats into on the island that they go back in time to stop Godzilla. She is the one releasing the Dorats there so they can mutate into King Ghidorah.
Yeah.
Why? Like that just, what was she expecting to do there? Like, what was she thinking was going to happen? Like, it just doesn't make sense to
she knew what
me.
was going to happen, but I think she's like the person that was in charge of the Dorats, which, by the way, I did not like the design of. They're very scary and uncomfortable to look at.
Yeah, they're like
I don't
creepy
like
little
them.
Furbies.
Like, Furbies
yeah.
are creepy and like Gremlins are creepy, but like this is like a different type of creepy, and maybe that's just like, I don't know, maybe their eyes were just too large. I don't know, but they were really weird. But I think she might have been the person caring for the Dorat.
But still, why would she release them though?
Yeah, I guess good point. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. That's why it really just doesn't make sense to me. And like, if she knew that the Dorats were going to mutate into King Ghidorah, then why the heck?
I mean, did they know?
Well, those two guys did, yeah, because that was their plan.
Oh,
that was their plan, was to make King Ghidorah so he could destroy Japan of 1992 and keep it from becoming a superpower. But once again, though, that just doesn't make sense to me, because if Godzilla's still around, wouldn't he destroy Japan and keep it from? I don't know.
Well, they tried to get rid of Godzilla, right? They tried to destroy the dinosaur and put him in the middle of the ocean. So, like...
But the thing is, though, is that they got rid of Godzilla so they could use King Ghidorah and have him destroy Japan. But if Godzilla was already there, wouldn't he be the one destroying Japan anyway? Like, why have King Ghidorah destroy Japan if Godzilla's already there to destroy Japan?
Okay,
is the point I'm trying to make.
I don't know.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. And that's why you're saying, Miranda, don't think about the story too much, because this is what happens when you think about the story. This story is just filled with so many plot holes. I just don't, like I said, I don't like the story. So it just doesn't make sense. And it's still, and even talking about it right now, it still doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's fair. It's just silly.
Yeah, it is silly. Although I did really think that it was funny how so they bring up this idea to get rid of Godzilla so he no longer destroys Japan. And then these guys, they create King Ghidorah. So then later in the movie, they're like, oh crap, we got King Ghidorah to deal with now. What if we bring back Godzilla so he can fight King Ghidorah? And it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Well, they didn't need to do that, because even though they try, it's kind of funny because they tried to get rid of Godzilla, but he still ends up getting created anyway, despite the fact that, so it's like Godzilla, he's like Thanos, he's just inevitable. So I always found that kind of funny. And what's even funnier is that this Godzilla, because he was exposed to more modern nuclear radiation and not the nuclear radiation that was used in the Bikini Atoll tests in the 40s, he's grown bigger and like a lot meaner. So not only did they try to get rid of Godzilla and end up not getting rid of him at all, they created a much meaner version of him and bigger versions. So like, it's like, oh man, they like really messed up. But so then this Godzilla comes back, he fights King Ghidorah, he defeats King Ghidorah, and then he goes off to start destroying Japan. And then they're like, well, shoot, maybe we should bring King Ghidorah back. It's like, and then we get Mega King Ghidorah. I always thought that was really funny with the story. It's like, oh crap, we need to get rid of Godzilla. Oh crap, we got King Ghidorah. We need to bring Godzilla back. Oh crap, Godzilla's back. We need King Ghidorah back. Like,
It's just a loop
I don't know. I thought that
until
was really
Mothra
funny.
shows up and was like,
Yeah.
well, Mothra doesn't show up in this one, but it's just a loop. That's what every Godzilla movie is.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we have Godzilla. Oh, we have Rodan or Mothra or King Ghidorah or Hedorah or, I could name all
exactly.
of them forever, And it's just that, like, loop. And I think that, like, structure of that, like, plot point works well with the Godzilla franchise. Because even though every movie follows that same monster v monster, with the few exceptions of more thinky ones like Return to Godzilla, the original Godzilla -1, Shin Godzilla, it's a consistent pattern that
Yeah.
is entertaining and that they can play around with. And this one, they played around with it, really, and it's fun. But, it's not the greatest thing.
Yeah. And, they definitely did have their fun with the story, but personally, I just feel like the story is too nonsensical for me to really enjoy it. And, like I said before in my quick thoughts, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy the movie, because I do. There are some very silly scenes in this movie that I get a real kick out of, and it helps make the movie fun and enjoyable to watch. But I just ain't, I'm not having it with this story. I'm just not. And I get, it's a movie about a radioactive dinosaur that literally spits fire and a three-headed dragon. But once again, I think I've said this before, there's a limit to how crazy you can get with a story for me. Like, I can buy a radioactive dinosaur that spits fire beams, but I can't really buy a time traveling group that goes back in time and, like, tries to stop Japan from becoming an economic superpower, but they bring a Japanese woman with them, and somehow the Japanese woman isn't in on the plan, and then when she, like, I don't know, I just don't like the story very much. But I do think that the whole introduction of the Godzillasaurus was interesting. I do kind of like that idea more. And it makes me think back to our Godzilla -1 review about when we talked about the Godzillasaurus in that movie, and how I was like, well, I would have liked an explanation to where this dinosaur creature came from, because they don't explain it. And to be fair, they don't really explain it in this movie either. He's just there. So you know what? I'll ease off on -1 for not telling us where the Godzillasaurus was in that movie, because Godzilla versus King Ghidorah doesn't either. So
Yeah, dinosaurs are just still existing on this random island off the coast of Japan. Like, they have dinosaurs there. Everyone knows that, said sarcastically.
I guess, yeah, I guess they just have dinosaurs there. Although I'm not sure how I feel about, like, King Ghidorah being a mutant in this movie and not a
Yeah.
space monster, specifically a mutant of, like, 3 creatures that come from the future. I think I prefer his space monster origins
Yeah.
better than
They wanted to change it
this.
up so it wasn't so close to that original story. They're like, how do we, like, change it
Yeah.
up? And I think it is an interesting concept. I don't know if it was executed to the
And
best
I
here,
I
but
do too.
interesting nonetheless.
Because, like, I like the idea of King Ghidorah being mutated by the nuclear radiation in the same way Godzilla was, and thus creating this 3-headed, like, mutant monster. I do like that idea, but I would have preferred it if they would have went a different way about it, instead of it making it like creatures that exist in the future. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how you could have done that with naturally occurring, like, animals that already exist on the planet. I don't know if you could have done it that way. But I don't know. But I do like the idea of him being mutated by the nuclear radiation.
To your point about how you keep bringing up that the girl who released the Dorats was, like, then surprised that like King Ghidorah came to be. Part of me feels like they might have had another story beat planned or something, and then they ended up going back on that idea, but then they didn't get a chance to, like, shoot more or do reshoots or something. I don't know, but because, like, it just, yeah, to what you're saying, like, it doesn't really make sense, because the whole idea was to remove Godzilla's remains from that area so that Godzilla didn't exist. But then she goes and releases the Dorats in that spot or in that area. So it's like, well, because I remember when I was like, this is the first and only time I've ever watched this movie, but when she did that, I was like, wait, what? I was like, well, I'm assuming this is how King Ghidorah comes to be, but like, why did she do that? And then in the next scene, she's like, what? That's how like we replaced Godzilla with King Ghidorah? And it's like, well, yeah, that's, that's what was going to happen if there was like a creature there, which now you release 3 of them. So yes. So I don't know. It was just kind of silly. And it felt a little nonsensical because it was like, well, yeah, I mean, why else? Like, what else would have happened? It's not like that you were like super far away and you were releasing the Dorats. Like, she should have known by doing that there that was what was going to happen. But I don't know. At the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. They just needed to create King Ghidorah. But I think you said this, Stan, like, it just would have made more sense if they had one of the guys do it, like, while everyone was not paying attention. Like, the fact that it was specifically her, and then, like, in the next scene, she was, like, shocked Pikachu. It's like, then why did you have her do it, It just leads to more questions than answers. But overall, it was cool that they had time travel. That's definitely something new for the Godzilla franchise, and an idea that I'm kind of surprised they didn't play around with in the Showa era. And what Miranda was saying, I was also disappointed that it wasn't alien, just because like their ship looks like an alien ship. So I was like, okay, it's aliens. And then I was like, oh no, it's time travelers from Earth. Okay.
It's so UFO coded. It's so like classic green alien with the weird like circle triangle head. Like, I'm just like, why? You could have just said they were aliens. Like, I know you didn't want to do aliens because that was King Ghidorah's original plot line and you wanted to change it up. But like, it's okay. It's okay. You could have just been aliens.
Yeah.
And then the fact that every time they say UFO, I'm like, don't they know that it's like they changed the acronym for it, at least according to the movie Nope. I was like, UFO is not accurate anymore.
They weren't told ahead of time, so they couldn't change it.
Yeah, they're not up to date with the 2024 lingo.
The UAP.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they even could have done something like, oh, we're future humans, but we're humans who've made contact with aliens. So we're like, we've combined our technologies or something. I don't know. Just so like.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
Dude, you're heading into Star Trek territory right there.
Might as well,
It kind of did give off a little bit Star Trek vibes. Just a little bit. In a good way.
Speaking of things not related to this movie, but also kind of related to this movie, I had the thought the other day, I was like, it would be kind of cool if there was like a post-apocalyptic Godzilla movie, like something like Mad Max-y, like Fallout-y, more Fallout-y than Mad Max, I guess. More like that, like a Fallout, like nuclear post-apocalyptic world, but then like Godzilla is, king. Like that would be pretty cool. But I guess we'll see if it becomes a comic book or a movie.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say that would be awesome. But yeah, now that you said that, Udi, they're gonna turn it into a comic book like a week after this conversation. Now, for those of you that don't know, in one of our Kaiju Korner episodes, just for added context to our listeners, Udi had mentioned it would be a really cool idea if they were to do a Godzilla heist movie, where like this group of thieves like uses Godzilla as tries to pull off a heist while Godzilla's attacking the city. And literally like 2 days after Udi had said that, they announced a comic called Godzilla Heist, where a group of thieves uses Godzilla to attack London so they can pull off a heist while London is busy with the Godzilla attack.
My ideas are too good.
Yeah, you're just out here predicting future Godzilla storylines. Maybe they sent our letter to the comic book shop instead of Toho Productions.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Comic book store is like, I don't think this is for us, but there's gold here.
Yeah, speaking of comic books, and even though it's still 2024 and or July 2025 is several months away, there will be a Godzilla free comic book for Free Comic Book Day in July of next year. So mark
Ooh,
your calendars.
that's
Ooh,
exciting.
excellent.
Yeah.
Lots of interesting Godzilla comics coming out. For those of you that yearn to see Godzilla destroy America, there's a really cool anthology comic coming out called
hmm
Godzilla versus America, where each issue is going to be about Godzilla attacking a different U.S. city. And the very first issue is going to be about Godzilla attacking Chicago. So that'll be interesting.
I believe there's also a comic about Godzilla skateboarding or roller skating or something. I saw it vaguely on Instagram the other day, so
There's a comic where he plays basketball against Charles Barkley, but
they're just putting
yeah.
Godzilla in all kinds of situations right now.
I guess so. I mean, he just recently fought the Justice League, so and they're getting a sequel to that comic, which I am very much looking forward to because they're going to introduce King Ghidorah and Rodan and hopefully Mothra. I don't know if they're going to have Mothra in there, but if they're having King Ghidorah and Rodan,
Well, if Mothra's there, I'll be there, so
yeah, I was going to say if they're going to have King Ghidorah and Rodan, I would imagine they would have to have Mothra as well. So.
yeah, she's so cool.
Oh, and there's also going to be a Mothra solo comic coming out, Miranda. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, yes. I did not know that.
Yes.
I will have to find that and read it.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't think it's out yet. I think it's coming out next year with all the other Godzilla comics, but we we should probably get back on topic and off of this Godzilla comics side tangent.
It's Godzilla related. It's Godzilla news. It's totally related to it.
Yeah, it's still Godzilla adjacent, so it still relates to what we're talking about, but
Yeah. I believe it was already mentioned, but this movie like has influences from like Terminator, Back to the Future. It calls back or reminds us of Godzilla -1 here in 2024, which I was not expecting. So that was kind of an interesting like parallel. I was like, "Ooh, wow, okay." But I want to talk about the Terminator or the M11 android guy. Basically it's absolutely ridiculous. Like he Twilight runs through the city, he flips a car over. They have like floating jetpacks, and the Japanese lady from the future just like uh jetpacks into like the main 1992 writer guy's apartment. She just like floats in there. Like the sci-fi like ness of this movie, like all the technology is very silly and the fashion choices are absolutely ridiculous. I'm like, why are they putting them in bright, not even bright, they're just highly saturated costumes, like green and purple, and there's like a yellow and an orange, and I'm like, the fashion department in this. I thought the future was supposed to all be chrome. Like chrome is the future, you know? But they also introduced like early CGI, like 1990s CGI, like the teleporting like effect that they have where they like do a 3D model of the like Godzilla at one point and then it like becomes rainbowy, which I thought was cool, and then like piece by piece like goes into the sky. I did like that. It was really fun to see like that early 90s CGI and like special effects, and seeing like a dinosaur like a T-Rex suit and like comparing that to the Godzilla suit and stuff, because Jurassic Park hadn't come out yet. The book was probably out, but the movie doesn't come out until 1993, which really sets a standard for dinosaur movies moving forward. So it's just weird to see like what dinosaurs in quotation marks looked like before Jurassic Park like took off and changed the whole dinosaur industry.
But yeah, no, you're right, Miranda. This movie does have a lot of influences from like Terminator, like you've been like we've all been saying. We got some heavy Terminator vibes from M11. Although I gotta say once again, because I love that the car chase scene with M11 because Miranda mentioned like it's so funny. Like he's
Twilight
just
run.
like running in
It's the
slow
Twilight
motion.
run.
Yeah, the Twilight. It's the Twilight run, but I think the funniest part in that scene, okay, there's two parts in that scene that make it great for me. First of all, I love how when the car crashes that M11 is in, the car that he crashes just explodes for no reason. Like it didn't hit anything. It didn't hit a gas station, like the fuel wasn't leaking out. The car literally just tips over and explodes for no reason. That right there is
GTA
hilarious in
logic.
itself. But then I love the yeah, like I guess cars in the 90s were just made out of nitroglycerin or something. But I love the part where he starts running and it's like it's super sped up. Oh, it's so great, man. It's so bad, but because of how bad it looks, that's what makes it so great in my eyes. So like I love that scene, and like even near the end where, or not near the end, I think it's like before he starts running after the car explodes for no reason, and like I think he kind of like tears part of his shirt off or whatever, and there's like fire behind him. Definitely got the Terminator vibes from right there. And yeah, I definitely had the thought, because dinosaurs are a big theme of this movie, and yeah, this movie does beat Jurassic Park out by 2 years, and I was thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting, like how this movie is bringing up dinosaurs and whatnot. And like this is around the time when Jurassic Park came out, but Jurassic Park isn't out yet. So I did find that interesting how that was a theme for this movie. And yeah, like before Jurassic Park essentially revolutionized dinosaur effects with its use of CGI, dinosaurs in most movies were just kind of like how they are in here. Like it was like puppets or suits and whatnot.
Yeah.
And Jurassic Park really was the first movie to be like, oh, we're going to use CGI and it's going to look great. And then everyone's like, well, guess we're going to have to do that as well. So that was pretty
Yeah,
cool
and
to see
like
that.
Jurassic Park does use CGI, but they also like use suitmation. Like that's a guy in a raptor suit.
They
And
do,
just to
yeah.
see like now there's so many different factors of like one being a Japanese movie, having probably a lower budget, one being an American movie with Spielberg
Yeah.
attached to it, like hundreds of thousands of dollars pumped into this movie. We have the best like claymation people working on it, and they like scoffed all these things. You have like there's a difference in the just time and money and quality that they could do, but it's so strange to be like, yes, this movie just came out a few years before this one, and look at Godzilla. Now he's a lovable giant kaiju. I like the look of Godzilla. He's still very cat-like in this one, but just to compare it to like,
Yeah.
here's a full-on raptor who will terrify you as a child and as an adult and is very scary. Like just the I don't know, the genre, like not genre, but like just the like comparison of the two things is like, wow. It's it's so strange. And I think I've probably mentioned this too about like the 70s movies and the 60s movies. It's just like looking at the Godzilla movie from Japan compared to the movies that were coming out in America at the time. Like there's like parallels, but then yet they're very distinct, and that's just based on the creators and the time and the money and just the people working on them and the culture that is like surrounding those people making that movie. So I find this stuff all very fascinating.
Yeah. And I will say, when you had mentioned, like, because you were talking about Jurassic Park when you mentioned Spielberg, I couldn't help but once again think of the Spielberg joke in this movie. What do you think, we're being invaded by little green men? Maybe there's some. Nah, keep it. It's our secret. You can go home and tell your son about it. Major Spielberg. Like, I love that joke. Sorry, I had to instantly thought about that when you mentioned Spielberg.
He's a popular guy. It makes sense that they're going to reference him.
I don't really have a lot to add to the overall story discussion. You guys pretty much covered anything and everything I kind of wanted to bring up. But I think like my biggest thing was, yeah, like the Terminator. Like this is what I was alluding to. My initial thoughts, like the Terminator homage, I guess, was pretty on the nose, but pretty funny. Just because at first it's like, oh wow, they're really going for a Terminator thing, and then it just gets really silly, really quickly, really 90s, really quickly. So that was kind of fun and unexpected. But yeah, I mean, like, I kind of wonder if we would have gotten something like that back in the Showa era if they had that sort of. I mean, I don't even know if technology is really the word, or I don't know if they had thought of it or tried to do something like that, if they would have done it. I don't know, but Yeah, it definitely felt very, very in line with like Showa era type decision making. But either way, just kind of like a fun, silly little thing. Definitely got some good laughs out of it. And I'm very curious to see how the next few movies are tonally in comparison to these three. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, Miranda, this is really cool to see dinosaurs in a big movie like this before. Like you said, Jurassic Park came and went and completely changed how dinosaurs were shown in film and just like in media. So this is almost, it's kind of reminded me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, because in like not in the way that this will sound, but so I'm pretty sure 2001: A Space Odyssey came out like 2 years or something like that before we had the moon landings. And so like there's like the stupid conspiracy theory that we actually didn't go to the moon, and that they hired Kubrick to film all of that and whatever. And so like, by the way I said that, I mean that's how I feel about it. But it is kind of crazy to think that that movie was made before the moon landing. So it's like, yeah, sure, like you had science, you had books, like you had, I'm sure, reports about like what space was like and stuff like that. But they did a pretty freaking bang up job of like making space look like space, and like all of that. So I mean, I don't know what kind of research went into deciding what the look and feel of like space and like being on a different planet and stuff, blah 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 blah, would be like. But yeah, I mean, they did a really really good job for that movie. So in like kind of a similar way, this movie did a really fun job of including dinosaurs in like a fun way and whatever. That, I mean, I don't know that Steven Spielberg or anyone on working on Jurassic Park had watched this or anything yet, but I mean, it is kind of cool to see like the precursor to the bigger event happening like right after, basically. Because I mean, again, I'm not insinuating or trying to say, or in any way trying to say that the moon landing didn't happen, but it's just kind of like a fun like parallel there, I guess.
Man, it's all a conspiracy, man.
The moon landing happened. It is a fact. It happened. I don't understand that conspiracy theory, but we're not here to talk about that.
Yeah.
We'd be here all night.
We're here to
It
talk
would
about
probably
fun
make
Godzilla
people
movies.
angry.
We'll save that. We'll save that for the conspiracy theory episode.
Yeah,
movie
I don't know if
theory.
we'll ever do the.
A film theory.
I know, I was a joke.
But yeah, like thinking about 2001: Space Odyssey and how they're showing space in that compared to like just being a few years out from the actual like event, compared to this movie being only a few years out to Jurassic Park. Like it's crazy how the like things line up that way, or like how like Pixar was like, we're gonna release Bugs Life, but then DreamWorks maybe I think released Ants. Like there's just these like strange parallels where they like, I don't know how it happens or why it happens, but it's so fascinating where it's like you're just a few years out from this like major popular thing, or like ideas cross and they're like slightly different, but they're like still kind of there. Like I'm sure someone's researched it and there's a paper on it and I could read it, but I find that like so fascinating.
Agreed.
So I wanted to bring up the design of King Ghidorah in this movie. So interesting little tidbit about that is the fan base is actually not very fond of this King Ghidorah design. And from what I've seen, the main reason behind that is because whenever Toho like uses King Ghidorah in like promotional materials and crossover events, it's always the high side design. And I guess fans are just getting sick and tired of the high side design. They want to see me like the Showa design, or maybe the Millennium Era design from Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Me personally, I don't mind this design at all. I think it's fine. I think it makes sense for an updated design over his like Showa era design. But the thing that I don't like about Heisei Ghidorah is his roar. I prefer the beady beady bee from the Showa era. They give him a much different roar in this movie, which I mean it's fine. It still sounds cool, but I prefer the original roar. But yeah, I'm not like the rest of the fan base where I just absolutely loathe this design. And like, I can understand why people don't like it because if something gets overused over and over and over again, it eventually gets tired. So I can understand that. But I'm okay with this design. Mega King Ghidorah, on the other hand, that's a cool monster. I like Mega King Ghidorah. Like, I like the idea of two of the heads being organic and like the middle head being metal, because Godzilla literally, this is kind of going a little bit off topic, but because I had mentioned cool scenes in my quick thoughts, one of the cool scenes in this movie is Godzilla literally blowing off one of King Ghidorah's heads with his atomic breath. Like, that's cool. That's really cool. So I enjoyed that, and I like how that leads into the design of Mecha King Ghidorah with his middle head being a robot while the other two are still organic. I kind of like how Metal King Ghidorah is like part organic, part robot. It's almost like he's an android in a sense, not really a robot, or like cyborg. I guess he's more of a cyborg than he is a straight up robot. Kind of like how they referred to a Mechagodzilla as a cyborg in the Showa Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Mecha King Ghidorah. I would love to see him show up again. I don't know how they would ever get that to work in the future Godzilla movie. They'd have to come up with some convoluted way. But hey, I mean, there's still a chance that it could happen in the MonsterVerse. I would be down to see that. Whether we will ever get it in the MonsterVerse, I don't know. But that would be really cool. I would love to see Mecha King Ghidorah show up again. And yeah, I'm not one of the haters of the Heisei era King Ghidorah design. I think it's fine. But is it my favorite King Ghidorah design? I wouldn't say so. I would say I still like the Showa design the best, but this design is fine.
To what you were talking about, Dan, like, I guess I understand the viewpoint that you brought up of like the fan base being annoyed at always seeing the same design. Like, I could totally understand that, but at the same time too, it's like I get it, but also it's like in my opinion, it's a really good design. So I don't know. I feel like if it was kind of goofy or something, I'd be like, all right, more understandable. Like, why did they stick to this? Like, if it looks kind of bad, but I think it looks pretty good. I think it's a solid continuation from the Showa era version. I would have to see a direct side by side to really decide for sure if I like one more than the other. But I feel like I would lean more towards liking this version a bit more. But again, I would have to see them side by side to really decide. But the one aspect I will 100% agree with you on, though, is that the BDBDB is far superior than the new roar. Like, it's not a bad roar, but it's not King Ghidorah. I really feel like the BDBDB is just too good, too iconic for them to have just tried to change. So I'm glad that at least seemingly they've gone back on doing that in other iterations. But yeah, because the newer roar from this movie just sounds a bit more generic. Like, it could be any big kaiju, whereas like the BDBDB is King Ghidorah, So totally agree with that. And I mean, yeah, just in general, the regular King Ghidorah is cool, but the Mecha King Ghidorah is definitely very, very cool. And like how you were talking about, I thought it is really cool to think about King Ghidorah being like a big old cyborg. Really, that part is really cool, and it almost made it feel more like a Megazord or like a Jaeger from Pacific Rim, with having the character whose name I'm forgetting be inside like the mechanical head and helping control Mecha King Ghidorah and all that. So like that was cool. I like that aspect. And yeah, I mean, overall you can't go wrong with having King Ghidorah in a movie. So I was excited to see this new version, and while it was disappointing to hear the changed roar, overall I would say I was pretty happy with the King Ghidorah action in this and everything like that. So yeah, no complaints here.
In regards to how you feel about this King Ghidorah design, Udi, it also helps that you're essentially a new fan who's never really been exposed to this design that much versus us long-term fans that have like always seen this design. Once again, though, I'm the outlier because I'm not bothered by Toho like always using this design for everything that they have King Ghidorah in. But I think, yeah, just this being just brand new exposure to you, I think also helps in that sense.
Yeah, no, I
For you
totally
as well.
agree. I'm definitely, I have less of a history here, so I mean, of course, I'm not going to be as bothered. And like I said, I totally understand that line of thinking. Like, for example, if for like the last 20 years, Marvel only used the Sam Raimi Spider-Man suit, like it's a good suit, it's a good look. But for 20 years straight, basically just using that suit, I feel like I'd be like, all right, please do something different.
You know what? That's honestly probably how those fans feel. Like if you put it that way.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I can totally understand it. But yeah, as like a newer fan, I'm like, I don't know. It's a good look, but like, yeah, I think putting it in that perspective, it's much more understandable. But yeah, what about you, Miranda? What did you think?
I miss the BDBDB. I really do miss the BDDDD or however you say the sound. Um, I was like, no, where did it go? Why did you take it away? It's such a like unique sound, and I like really like the sound design for King Ghidorah that way. Like, I don't know, they changed it up. It's fine, whatever. They did it, but I miss it. But I did like the fact that like they still kept the lightning bolts yellow, and then for Mecha King Ghidorah, they had two lightning still be yellow, and then the other lightning was like a pulsating, like not rainbow like Mecha Godzilla's rainbow laser eyes, but like it had like a multicolor aura to it. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I really like that. I like the design of King Ghidorah. I think he looks really nice and clean and like professional. And also, I haven't seen this design for Eternity either, like the other Godzilla fans. So like, I don't know. I thought he looked really nice. I think the fact that I think for sure the mecha version, I think, is fully a puppet. Like it's not a guy in a suit. So I mean, that's really cool. It's just the heads moved a lot cleaner, the tail moved a lot cleaner. He just moved around a lot cleaner in this version than he has before, which I really liked. I also got like Pacific Rim vibes from it. I was like, this is reminding me of Pacific Rim. Yeah, I agree with what you were saying. Like, if they used the same Spider-Man costume for 20 years, it would get really annoying. I see why people probably are like not particularly on board with this design because there are other designs of him. But at the same time, like if they're using the Godzilla from this era a bunch of times too, like why is like is it because there's so many variations of Godzilla that it's like, oh, okay, we're cool with that, but not cool with King Ghidorah version being used all the time? I don't know. I'm not in charge of marketing, so but I hadn't even really noticed that until you mentioned it, Dan, so I'm also not that too familiar with the exact differences of every single kaiju design in the entire Godzilla franchise, because there's a lot.
Yeah, and in terms of what you said about like, because Toho did use Godzilla's high side design for a while as well, but I think the difference there is because they're talking like the fan base is talking more about like adaptations or not adaptations, but like the use of designs in like video games and other media just outside of the movies. Because like take the Godzilla fighting games for example, it's not just Millennium era Godzilla or it's not just Heisei era Godzilla. You got like in like the Pipeworks trilogy, like Destroy All Monsters, Save the Earth, Godzilla Unleashed. Especially like in Godzilla Unleashed, there's 3 different versions of Godzilla in that game. You got the 1954 Godzilla, you got the Heisei Godzilla, and then you got the Millennium era Godzilla, and it's like that in the other previous 2 games as well. But for King Ghidorah in all 3 games, it's just the Heisei design. Yeah, and then most recently in Gigabash, like yeah, they used Godzilla's Heisei design there, but once again, it all goes back to just Toho has used different Godzilla designs for outside of other media than just the movies. Like they have done it before. And in fact, I think I've said this before, but there was a time where Toho was obsessed with the Shin Godzilla design. Like they literally just used Shin Godzilla in like all of their promotional material and whatnot. But like even in Gigabash, like Gigabash uses the high side Godzilla for its character, for its version of Godzilla in that movie. And they just recently announced King Ghidorah, but once again they're using the high side design for King Ghidorah instead of using something different. And I think that's just what fans are talking about, is when they use these characters in other media, they want to see a different design. And I think we kind of got a breath of fresh air with King of the Monsters when that was released, because each monster just got a somewhat complete redesign for that movie. But yeah, I think that's more or less what it's about right there.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I understand. That's making sense. And I didn't know that Gigabash used the Heisei designs for their versions. So that's a fun fact that I just learned.
I was just gonna ask, did you guys talk about the Dorats at all, or just kind of in passing?
Me and Miranda talked about them a little bit, yeah. We both thought they were creepy.
Like, in passing, I did not like the look of them.
I just like give my 2 quick cents on the Dorats here, because I kind of missed that part earlier. I wasn't sure how to feel about the Dorats. Like, I guess it's an interesting / fun idea, I guess, but I mean, again, like, this movie is just very 90s, and the design of those Dorats felt very 90s-y. In a way, it felt like they were made just to sell like merch, like in the way that like Star Wars movies make like porgs and stuff.
Definitely. They were like, yeah, let's make this a plush and sell it. Though it's not very cute, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, like in a way though, it feels like, at least from my perspective, from this point in time, it felt like Godzilla movies at that point were more kid friendly. But I guess with Return of Godzilla, that wasn't necessarily like a kids movie. That was more serious again. And then the previous movie was also not necessarily like kid coded. So, but again, I mean, definitely just felt like the typical attempt to try to make something cute. And I mean, like, to some degree, like, if I had been a kid, well, if I was a kid at that time, I think I might have liked them, but I don't know. It's hard to know, because there's so many weird creatures from the 90s that were for kids, like Teletubbies. Teletubbies are kind of creepy if you really look at them, but they were meant for kids. And as a kid, I had multiple Teletubby toys, and I liked them. I didn't think they were creepy or weird at all. Not as much as I do now. And I mean, like, I'm not scared of them, but like, I don't know. Like, they are just like a weird design. So, especially for something that's meant for kids. So, I don't know. Just kind of getting off topic here, but yeah. Thought they were kind of weird, but like in a typical 90s weird way, but not like offensive or anything. Not like Manila levels of bad. So,
They were better than Manila.
It's true.
And they didn't sound like a dying donkey,
Yeah,
so
I
I'm here
have
for
to-
that at least.
I have to agree. I think the Dorat designs are better than Showa era Manila. Yeah.
When you have such a low bar, such as Manila, it would have been pretty impressive if they had done something worse in Manila.
Do you think Manila has like any diehard fans out there that's like, yes, I love Manila, and like they get mad at us whenever we insult
Probably,
Manila like this?
I wouldn't doubt it. I'm sure there's people that think he's cute or something. Like, I could see someone being like, he's cute, like in an ugly way, and be like, I mean, sure, I guess if you like
So ugly.
like the look of like E.T. combined with a rock, then like sure. But like,
yeah,
Yeah,
That's not for
E.T.
me.
combined with a rock.
yeah.
but you do you.
He does look terrible. It's just he sounds like a dying donkey, and that's my main issue with him. It's just the sound design surrounding
Yeah.
him is not great.
And he shoots smoke rings that do nothing.
Yeah.
He's useless.
I mean, he really is, if we're being honest here. But Manila does return in another movie. I'm not going to say which one, but he does return in another movie. So we'll get to
Is that
that.
in
Is
the
it the
when we
Millennium
get
return
to
of
it.
Son of
But,
Godzilla?
no, that movie does not exist. But yeah, but essentially we are gonna get a Godzilla Jr. soon, and yeah, that's essentially the high sci version of
Interesting.
Manila. But it's not even the same. It's not the same character though, so it's essentially a different character. But I wanted to, because Miranda, you had mentioned about how they just randomly speak English in this movie. I wanted to comment on that because I thought that was kind of odd. I always find it kind of odd how some Japanese films do that, where they just out of nowhere speak English. And Shin Godzilla does the same thing, where like characters will just randomly speak English, and like I never understood that. Like, why? Like, what's the point? Does English just sound cool to them or something? Like, I don't get it. Like, two of the time travelers don't look Japanese. They look American. So I always wondered, especially like M11. I always wondered maybe M11 was like created in America, and that's why he's like speaking English in some points. But then even the main Japanese character randomly says something in English at one point. And I always found that kind of weird. Like I don't understand that. Like, why do they just randomly speak in English?
Like when in the middle of like saying something, they like say a random thing, like it's like speaking foreign language, Kentucky Fried Chicken, speaking foreign language, like something like that.
No, not in that sense. It's like they'll just randomly say a phrase in English. Like in this movie, for example, like it was during the scene where I don't remember the name of the main Japanese character, of like one of the main Japanese character. He was the author though. Like it was at the scene where they destroy the core in the UFO that's controlling uh King Ghidorah, and he just randomly shouts, "Now make my day," or whatever. And it's like why? Like why did he say that in English? Like I don't know. It's just weird. It's just a weird observation I made.
No, yeah, I mean that. I feel like that happens in foreign films, and it is always kind of just funny because it's like, wait, what? Is there no like direct translation for that, or why did they why did they specifically say that? But I don't know. I don't. It's always been something I've kind of been curious about as well. But I don't know. It's definitely interesting.
I just want to say, because they do the same thing in Shin Godzilla. So like when we eventually get to Shin Godzilla, you'll see it again there.
I mean, there are like movies and stuff where like people speak like, I'm thinking like Daredevil. I'm pretty sure at some point like there's two characters fully speaking in like Italian, or maybe it's Russian or something. Like they do that, but you're thinking or mentioning something different than that, right? Where it's not like loan words and it's not
Yeah,
full on
because
conversations. It's just like random phrases.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because like the scene you're bringing up in like Daredevil, for example, that's probably just two characters
Mhm.
having a conversation in their native language. In the context of this movie, like these characters are surrounded. They like aren't really surrounded by people that speak English. I mean, granted, once again, I know the android speaks English every now and then. And that might be because he's made in America or from America. And like those two other time travelers could also be from America. I don't know for sure. But still, it's like but like I'll bring Shin Godzilla up for as an example. Like the characters in there all speak Japanese, but then they'll just randomly speak English. It's like why are they speaking English if they're surrounded by people that are speaking Japanese anyway?
I mean,
It's just
it could be
weird. I don't know.
like how like people just talk. It's like, oh, they might say like sayonara, or I'm probably pronounced that wrong, or like
True. Yeah.
Viva la
That's a good
revolution or
point.
whatever. Or like I say je ne sais pas all the time, and it means I don't know. Like it's just like random phrases that sound cool, I guess, maybe.
You know what? You bring up a good point. That could be the case because yeah, like I like to say adios amigo a
Yeah.
lot, so it's like okay, so maybe you do bring up a point and maybe it's just because of the fact that we're like native English speakers that it just comes off odd to us. So that's a good point.
But yeah, I just think that they're like just key phrases that they might think sound cool or like were popular at the time. Or maybe the actors themselves are like, "Ooh, I think it'd be really cool if I said this in English." Because that could be a factor too.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a really good point and not something I really thought about. So it makes a little more sense when you put it in that context.
Yeah, so do we have anything else to discuss on this movie?
I love the part where Godzilla destroys Tokyo or he's destroying Tokyo. Well, granted, I just love any scene where Godzilla is destroying a city. They really need to have more scenes like that in the Monsterverse. But I really like the scene where he's destroying Tokyo and he like kind of slips and falls. It's really funny. He like slips and falls and like destroys a building in the process. But another thing I want to mention real quick, near the end of the movie where Godzilla's rampaging through Tokyo and you got this Japanese guy there and he's like, I still think this is the same dinosaur that saved my life from back in the day. And he's like staring at the window, out the window at Godzilla, and Godzilla's staring back. And I like how the scene is framed because it's just like silence and you see Godzilla staring at him. So it makes you think, oh, does Godzilla remember this guy? Like, what's going to happen? Is he going to leave him alone? But then, like, a couple minutes later, it's like, nope, Godzilla roars and just atomic breaths him, nukes the building he was in. And I don't know. I think that scene is a little badass because I like how they kind of subvert your expectations by making you think, okay, maybe Godzilla does remember this guy. Maybe he is going to leave him alone. But nope, he just straight up nukes him with his atomic breath. So.
One other last quick thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't remember if you brought this up, Dan, but there's this really good line in the movie said by the lead Futurian that's, "You who bow at the altar of nukes have created Godzilla anew." And like, it's a solid line of dialogue.
Oh yeah, that is a badass line. You who bow at the altar of nukes. Like, oh yeah, that's for as silly and as crazy as this movie is. That's a cool line. I will give them credit for that.
Props
Whoever
to
wrote
you.
that, props to you, man. Yeah, props to you. Like you, yeah, I applaud you because that is a cool
Like
line.
it's sort of like early morning Saturday cartoon vibe, but like in a good way, like a really good way. So yeah, that was my last contribution, just because like I remembered that I took a picture of my TV screen when I was watching. It's like, man, what a good line. So yeah,
The best lines always come from the oddest places.
true.
Do you think God stays in heaven because he too fears what he creates or whatever from Spy Kids 2?
Oh yeah, that's from Spy Kids 2. One of the most insightful, thought compelling lines of
Yeah.
dialogue, and it comes from freaking
What was
Spy
that
Kids.
meme you
2.
brought up before, Dan? Where it's like every screenwriter in the room groans when like they hear like a good line or something like that.
Oh no, it was the meme from WandaVision where it was like, what is grief but not love persevering. I'm gonna swear here, but like the meme is that, and like somebody like commented on that and was like, every screenwriter in America just whispered "fuck" under their breath. So.
Real. That's the same thing with Spy Kids too.
Yeah.
You hear that and you're like, man, what the heck?
But it's crazy. Like these powerful or like intense lines of dialogue come from the strangest places where you never expect it to come. But yeah, that line, Udi, is a pretty good line. And I like the fact that you were like, I have to take a picture of this. Because I do that too with media. Usually it's silly stuff, but it's like this has triggered something in my brain and I must capture it on a device so I remember it.
Yeah, I knew I wouldn't remember, so I was like, and I mean, I could have written it down, but I was too lazy to. So I was like, I'm watching. I might as well just like really quickly take a picture with my phone so I don't forget. And then thankfully I remembered before we stopped because I was like, wait, I remember the quote. I have to bring it up because it was a good line. So
Yeah.
it's nice to know other people do that too, though. Got to capture it in the moment, you know.
Yeah, definitely. On that note, I guess, if we have nothing else to discuss, I think it's time for the lizard fact of the day.
And what is today's lizard fact of the day, Miranda?
The lizard fact of the day is about the Australian water dragon. The Australian water dragon is found in eastern Australia as well as southern New Guinea. They can be found in tropical rainforests. Their habitat is flowing water with tree cover and basking sites. They eat vegetables, fruits, flowers, and crustaceans. They have a deep angular head and a crest of scales that join the vertebrae crest and extends down to the length of their body into the tail. And their tail can regenerate when lost. So that's the lizard fact of the day. Let's get into star rating. Dan, what would you give Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991 out of 5?
Good question. So, while I still do enjoy this movie, I do think that the story is just way too nonsensical for me to get anything out of it. I mean, I like Mecha King Ghidorah. I like Godzilla blowing off King Ghidorah's head. I like the "You who bow at the altar of nukes" line. And I do kind of like the whole kind of new origin they gave Godzilla, him being this like dinosaur that lived on this island that was mutated by the nuclear radiation. I do kind of like that change, and I like the idea of King Ghidorah being a mutant, despite the fact that I still prefer his space monster origins. That being said, I think I'm going to give this movie 2.5 stars. I do enjoy it, but I don't think it does enough to make it a 3-star movie in my eyes. So I'm going to go with 2.5.
That's totally fair. That makes sense. What about you, Udi? What would you give this movie out of 5?
I'm kind of in the same boat as Dan. I mean, like, this was kind of a fun movie, and I'm technically speaking, it's still really cool. Like, all the destruction scenes in, like, the city, and the fight with King Ghidorah and Mecha King Ghidorah and Godzilla, like, all that is still really cool and really well done. And, like, you get, like, the revamped Godzilla once, like, they bring him back to, like, the present day, and he looks so cool, and he just goes on like a frenzy, and just all of that, like, all of that is really cool. And I mean, at the end of the day, again, as we always say, like, that's like one of the main reasons we watch these movies. So, like, on that aspect, on that front, like, very, always enjoyable when they do that stuff, and it's cool. So everything else is kind of just background noise to some degree, outside of that one great line, like Dan was saying. So I'm gonna go and give this I'll give it a 2.5 as well.
For my score, I don't know. The first initial number that popped in my head was a 3.5. Seems like we're kind of in a different realm here within the scores, but that's not abnormal for us.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, I figured you would probably enjoy this movie a lot more than we did, so that makes sense for
Yeah,
you,
I mean, I'm
Miranda.
gonna give it a 3.5. It's got time travel. It's silly. It's ridiculous. It's not good, but it's great. Like, it just has everything that I kind of like in, like, cheesy sci-fi movies and, like, time travel movies and, like, all of that jazz. So, yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3.5, which means the Atomic Lizard's average score for Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, 2.833 repeating, which would round to a 3. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to our conversation about Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991. If you're interested in hearing more, check out our previous episodes, and as always, you can find us on Instagram at Atomic Lizards Pod and on Letterboxd at Atomic_Lizards.